Darling, we've had one hell of a time, but the question on everybody's mind, where is the
Hello and welcome to Ideas Don't Bleed, a comics podcast presented by Ashcan Press and featuring Matthew Rosenberg and the Supple Boiz, Ethan S. Parker, and Griffin Sheridan. This is part 2 of our discussion with Meghan Fitzmartin. We hope you enjoy.
So you land on Tim Drake right when you get in the door, and for lack of a sort of better term, you kind of plant your flag in him. I mean, you've done like a lot with Tim,
Right.
and most of your DC work has been with him.
Yes.
It
Barring one foray out with Penguin, but yeah, it's mostly been Tim Drake.
Sometimes he's on a team though, so there are other people there.
That's true.
For me, I really love the idea of like grabbing a character and being like, I love this character, like I want to run with them. And was that something you had in mind? Is Tim someone you loved going in? Was it just the luck of the draw? Like,
yes, on all counts. I mean, this is I love extra time with a character, as much time as I can get. I think that helps you build a really good emotional rapport, both with the audience and with the character themselves. Like, I'm not a woo-woo writer, but like there does feel like a sort of trust with a character, especially a character that has been around for so long, that has their own mythos, that like I feel both the pressure and the honor of being able to play in that character's world and making sure that I tell the best story that I can tell for that character and for the people who that character represents. Because to be honest, like the more that I've been working with Tim Drake, the more I've sort of realized that each Robin kind of represents a specific generation. And the more that I got into that, the more that sort of became my way into the character. So I was really grateful that I got the chance to write more of Tim Drake. Now, I had no idea that I was going to. It was very much a like, I will take whatever you give me. I am a happy-go-lucky. I just like writing stories. What if you got a brief, you want me to do something, let me know and we'll go. It's part of that comes from writing in television, also writing in animation, where in TV writing, you know, if you did not create the show, you are writing a voice of someone else, and so you were writing you were writing someone else's version of a character, which I love, and I love the ability to have been doing that with Tim Drake for so long and wanting to speak to that character. And so I never necessarily was like, oh, I really want to do these things, because that was not the question that was asked. The question that was asked was, do you want to do something with this character? And the more that I spent time with that character, I was like, yes, I do. I have many thoughts on this. And as I think you have to do as a writer, you have to sort of be like, no, I know what this is. I know exactly what this is, and I'm going to go with it. And you can come along for the ride or not. Robbie, I actually talked to Robbie the other day, and Robbie was like, you're a part of a party, and either people are going to come with you or they're not, but like you bring the party where you go. And that is, I think, the similar thing with Tim Drake, where it's like, I'm going to tell the story for as long as anybody lets me tell the story, and if people come along, that's cool. If not, that's also fine. And
I think that's a really interesting way of talking about it and thinking about it. Like I don't know. I mean, I had a similar experience in getting DC, because I had this call with Ben, and he was like, well, what do you want to do? And I sort of walked through like ideas and thoughts. And then it wasn't until I said like sort of Wildcat stuff that he was like, oh, there's a spot for, like do Grifter. And
he lit up like a Christmas tree.
He lit up like, I mean, he did. It's funny because I'm good friends with James Tynan, and after right after I got off the call with Ben, James called me and was like, how was the call? And I was like, I think it was really good. And then I was like, it was going okay. And then I mentioned Wildcats, and James was like, you're such a kiss ass. And I was like, I didn't know he was a long form editor. Like, I didn't do my research, so I wasn't trying to kiss his ass. And he's like, well, you kissed his ass. And I was like,
well done.
Yeah. But you get that. There's such a fun feeling of being like, oh, I have a lot of stories to say. Like, you have to go in being like, I have a lot to say. Yeah. And then you kind of keep getting tested on that to be like, do you though? Like, and that's how it's been for me. Like, I did 2 issues, and when I turned in my first script, they were like, do you want to do 5 more issues? And I was like, yeah. And like, I turned in my first issue of that, and they were like, do you want to do the full Wildcats book? And I was like, yeah. And it's just this always game of being like, I'm here as long as you'll have me. Yeah. And I have been on books where I've been like, I'm out of stuff to say about this. I'm done. But like, there is a fun, like, maybe I only have 2 issues worth to say on this, or maybe I have 30, but I'm gonna like come in and act like I have 200, and it's such a, you're the party, and you can, come and join me or not. But there's this assumption that you're going to be talking about Tim Drake for the next 10 years, and DC can either listen to you or not.
Honestly, exactly. Like, if I feel very strongly about this character, and I love him, and I have plenty to say. And if I only get 2 issues with him, cool. Then that was all of the amount that I was going to say, like, that that you're going to give me to say with him. You don't know what my fan fiction account is. You can't take that away from me.
I mean, it's possible they can, but
I mean, they should, honestly, but I don't have one really, so it's okay.
When you talk about, it's interesting that you talk about the Tim being like the different Robins being generational, and like I've heard other people say that it's like, oh, it depends when you came up and what you came up with, and I don't have as much. I have my own favorite Robins and this and that, but I never thought of it that way. But I'm very. I mean, I recognize that it's definitely a truth with the fans and the audience and the creators. But coming up in X-Men, like, it was definitely true that you would meet people who are like, and it's still true in X-Men that like you can judge how people react to things to be like, did you grow up reading Chris Claremont X-Men?
No, absolutely.
Watching the cartoon? Did you grow up on the movies? Like that all colors how you're going to take things. And so, I mean, I guess the question is, was Tim your Robin? Like, he's generationally your Robin, you feel like?
No, yes and no. So these questions are almost always like, is this a trap? Because then people are like, but you don't love him. And it's like, no, that's not. No,
all cards on the table, depending on everything. Tim is either my 4th or 6th favorite Robin.
All right.
Also Rosenberg loves a trap question.
I love it. This is an ambush podcast. We're gonna cut out everything.
I don't mind a trap question as long as we all know it's a trap. That's okay.
No, obviously, yes. There are people who are going to be like, but you write him. He should be your favorite. That's not the reality of the world. Like,
it also is. I think the way that I've gotten around this question is by the fact that like there are just things about each Robin that I really love. I grew up with Nightwing. I am an oldest child. There was a lot with Nightwing is the Dean Winchester of comics. Like, there's this level of just oldest child trying to do his best, but also like getting into trouble and not always doing his best. And so I definitely connected with a lot of that growing up. Also, I was stuck essentially in the 60s and 70s for most of my growing up experience. So it wasn't like I was raised like a true millennial until I got out of high school. So that, I think, like, was my first Robin. And then when I was starting to watch Batman the Animated Series, I started watching Tim Drake there, and then worked backwards sort of into the Tim Drake comics. And so and then I fell in love with Damian. Like, I didn't expect to love Damian as much as I loved Damian. I remember reading those comics, and I love Grant Morrison. I was always a Grant Morrison fan, and I remember reading it going, oh, I hate this. This is new and different and change. And then I read more and I was like, oh, what a little shit. And then that, like, it was sort of just how it ended, and was like, okay, I guess I'm fine with this now. So like all of them, and then Jason came back, and
Yeah.
There's been so much amazing work done with more recent stories of Jason that I have been like, because early on I was never a Jason fan. So all of these different things of like, I grew up with all of these different Robins, and Tim has always sort of been there in a way. It feels like your friend from high school who like you just grew up with, but you're not aware how close you are until you come back together, and because you're in the same city and you're like, oh, hey, isn't our childhood weird? And then you just bond because you're like, yeah, that was weird. That was a weird time and no one else understands. And so I think that that's sort of how I came back to Tim Drake and engaged with Tim Drake, is that he's always been there. And now it's like we're living in the same town. And
he lives on a boat also.
I mean,
I don't know how that came about.
I pitched the idea to my editor of Tim living on a boat, mostly because I wanted to get Tim away from everything that we knew about Gotham, everything that we knew about the family, and living on a marina. I was like, this is exactly the place where Tim would end up. This is a place that like I know really well and I think should be in more things. And I just love a marina. A marina is a place of just wild people and humans and activities. So
it is funny because in your book, when you start introducing the marina and the characters, and I was like, it's one of those things where you're like, I have no idea if this is real, if this is what this is like at all, but it feels authentic and crazy. Like, I love those things that feel like, I don't know if this is super well researched or not researched at all, but like, it feels good. Like, it feels like realized. It feels really realized.
Thank you.
And so finding out that you're on a boat, on your podcasting boat, like, answered a lot of questions. And I'll be honest, part of me was like, I hope in some way, part of me was like, I hope she did no research on this.
I knew nothing. I know absolutely nothing about boats.
And people,
I've never seen a boat.
Yeah,
they're just large ducks, is what boats are, right?
Yeah, I mean, it would just be amazing if marina people were like, this is the least authentic representation of a marina. But yeah, no, it's great. I'm really like, I really like the book. I really love Tim Drake Robin. And one of the things I realized, I really liked the first issue a lot. I thought, oh, it's really fun. You really capture this detective thing really well. Like you like, it's actually a detective story, but in a fun, like, kind of kids detective way. And then in the second issue, you have that beat where you're like, or maybe it's the third issue, where you're like, is this an Arthur Conan Doyle story? Is it a Philip Marlowe story? And you're like, no, it's Scooby-Doo Mysteries. and like, I was just sort of, my jaw kind of dropped at that, because I was like, I don't know if this is like one of the like boldest, like, you're just sort of laying your cards on the table of being like, this is our influence. This is what, and I love that. Like, I'm super into that idea of just being like, here's what we're doing, like, come along with us. And I was that sort of the idea going forward? Was it always like, we want to do Scooby-Doo Mysteries, we want to do a kind of like monster of the week, and a kind of, that's going to be a big conspiracy, and the crazy characters around him and his friends all coming in? Was that always it?
Yeah, I mean, I pulling very much from my own personal interests and preferences. I grew up on, older shows that were very much about the community that exists as we are all trying to solve some sort of wackadoo mystery that like only has slight tethers to reality. And that I love a mystery. I have always loved the first books that I remember reading were like the Nancy Drew murder mystery, or they weren't murder mysteries. She always got kidnapped, which is my favorite thing in the entire world. I love kidnappings. I know how to spell chloroform. It's one of my favorite things. Like, immediately, I knew how to spell that without even looking, because I just read so much about chloroform as a kid. And it's so much, this book is so much a labor of love and a labor of like pouring into this story with Tim, because that's a side of Tim that I find really interesting, and something that we don't get to see as much, because superhero comics are always about like superheroes. They're always about the more big, crazy, like an alien's coming again. And like, that's fine. I love those stories too. But I was really influenced by Mark Waid's Daredevil, and how those were just so much more stories about this local community, like this neighborhood.
Yeah.
And he leaves the Avengering to the Avengers. They're going to take care of the world as it is. I care about Hell's Kitchen, and that is where that's just where I'm staying. And obviously, like, that ebbs and flows, but like that was sort of the push with this, is to give Tim this world and to really lean into the detective stuff, because that is there's so many people that ask the question, why Tim, and who gives a shit about Tim, really? And that's an unfair question, but in a world full of superheroes and high powered and whatnot, how does he stand out? He stands out because he's a detective. He stands out because he is the Robin who discovered who Batman is. So if you're doing a book about him, you dive into that and you dig into a murder mystery that pulls from the greats, pulls from the first murder mysteries. We get, like, you know, Poe's mysteries, and we get Scooby-Doo, because that's also part of this world. Like, you just trying to fill it with all of these things that are all important to mystery solvers and mystery lovers like myself.
Yeah, it's such a smart take on it, because I do feel like I watched Michael Mann's Thief recently, the 70s, and it's a great film. You know, it's a 70s heist story. But basically, in the end, they, like, spoiler for anyone who hasn't seen Thief, it came out in the 70s, like, or early 80s. Like, sorry, I'm spoiling it. Whatever. Get over it.
We'll put time codes in so you can
like, this is a spoiler for all of you who are waiting for the 35th anniversary DVD of Thief or whatever. But, like, in the end, they have to steal it. They have to break into a vault, and he's, like, the great safecracker. And the whole thing is, he goes, well, I'm going to go into the building on Friday of a long weekend, because it's going to take me 3 days to just blowtorch through the door. Yeah. And that's it. And, like, that's the heist. It's just like, well, no one's going to come into work on Monday. So Tuesday, I have till Monday night to get out. And I watched it and I loved it. And I was like, we're in such an era of everything has to be, like, Mission Impossible. Everything has to be Fast and Furious, where it has to be bigger and crazier. Yeah. That, like, I think is sort of antithetical to character work, and I think is antithetical to, like, it makes us lose sight of why we care about character. Yes. Because it's about the intimate and the personal and the relatable. And, like, I love a Mission Impossible movie. I love seeing Tom Cruise stuck to the side of something that's moving fast. But, like, I'm
currently rewatching the Mission Impossible movies right now. Like, I love them.
I love them. They're amazing.
But, wait, real quick. What's the best one? What's the best Mission Impossible?
Ghost Protocol.
Okay.
Yeah.
Ball out.
Get out of here. Oh, it's too long.
Fuck off. Sometimes, every now and then, I'm like, is 3 my favorite? I fucking
3 is
love
pretty
3.
good.
It's really good.
But everyone's always like, it starts with 4, and I'm like, JJ did some pretty good work in 3.
3 and 4 are always duking it out.
When's the last time you watched 3? That's my question.
Just like a year or two.
A couple years ago. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, just a couple years ago. It gets weirdly dark. It's weird.
Quite dark.
It's weirdly dark in the way that all J.J. Abrams films are shot weirdly dark, and you can't see anything.
That's weird.
I don't know. It's got brain bombs. Anyway, continue.
It's got brain bombs.
Brain bombs are tight.
But, you know, I just think about that a lot of, like, I grew up reading, you know, for me, like, a lot of the stuff I loved, like, I wasn't I remember hearing the Stanley expression, it's the world outside your window, and me being like, oh, like, it's not all the world outside your window. You have the Silver Surfer off in space and the Fantastic Four doing all that stuff, but, like,
it's way outside your window.
It's way out. I mean, like,
it's a dot far away.
Yeah. But I like Daredevil and Spider-Man, and, like, I remember, like, the New Warriors were, like, kids, and the same thing, like, I have an affinity for Marvel because I grew up in New York City, and I was like, oh, they're going places I go. Yeah. But, like, in the same way, like, the DC universe, like, Superman's amazing, and I love Superman, and I love Wonder Woman. Like, they're amazing characters and some of my favorite comics. But there's just something about when you can do a street level story. Yeah. And, like, Tim is such a great gateway for that, because he is this kid who's very self-sufficient, and he's very much into figuring stuff out and finding stuff. And so like when you talk about like, I wanted to put him somewhere, you have that perfect mix for me of like, it's the world outside your window, but also it's not, because it's a marina, and I've never really hung out at marinas.
Exactly. Like you want to ask the question, how is this different? Sure, fine, I get that, but it doesn't have to be the big, to your point, Mission Impossible, Fast and Furious all the time. I think that is something that like I frankly get exhausted by. I get this the fatigue over, and it's something that I very much want to come back, is that we can tell big stories. We should tell big stories. I absolutely think that that's the amazing thing that we get to do. We should also tell small stories. I mean, Identity Crisis is one of the best stories, and it is such a smaller scale story compared to Crisis on Infinite Earths. And both things are important to the medium. Both things moved the medium ahead various different ways. Yeah. But we can't not have one without the other.
Yeah. And I think, I think about that a lot, of like the way both of the big companies push out events, and you're like, every event makes the ones before it a little less special in some way, because they're so epically huge. And the way to counteract that is to do intimate stories, to find out about, Batman's neighbors, to like, have,
One of my favorite stories from Fantastic Four is when they give, it's Mark Waid again, it's when they give Johnny control of the company. Like, what a... The stakes are not anywhere near what they are normally, but they're so real for Johnny, and they're so real for the family, and I loved that. Like, I thought that was so interesting.
For sure. And it's really fun to take that stuff and dive into it, but also find the organic way in, and that's what's fun. Speaking of that, like, I obviously a big headline grabber around your book is Tim being bisexual. You were nominated for a GLAAD award for it, and it's obviously something that people love and are celebrating, and is really exciting. Like, but also it goes to that thing of being relatable for people, that people are, want to see themselves represented in books, want to see their friends and their family represented in books, want to see people they know, want to see experiences that aren't just myopically a singular thing. Where did that come from? The idea of having Tim be bisexual, exploring that in the book?
Largely it came from when Dave Wolgez, who was the editor for my Urban Legend comics, reached out to me. He was like, we'd love to have more Tim Drake stories. Let me know what you think, what stories you'd like to tell with Tim. And I was like, great, a perfect opportunity for me to read comics as my job, which is my favorite reason to read comics ever, is when I get paid for it too. But I got to go back and read some of my favorites, and to really binge Tim Drake, essentially, to really binge a character, which is not something that I normally do. I normally will read like series and things like that, but to binge a character is really fun. And the more that I was getting into it, the more I was like, this feels like the story that has not been told and needs to be told. And really just felt it in my gut, and like went in, I pulled screen grabs, and I had like a dossier basically for my editor to be like, here you go, here is my reasonings behind it. It came from a very organic space, I felt, where I was like, I can see these things. I can see how this leads to this moment in Tim's life, and I think that this is something that we should do. And that's where that came from. It was just sort of diving into the character and feeling it out with that character, and wanting to be partners with that character, and going basically like, what do you want to say? What is it that you want to do and want to say with this? And this is what I felt like. And then the more that I was thinking about it post that time, and post like it coming out and all of the stuff, was like, the stuff that we were talking about with millennials, it works out that it's also a very millennial conversation, to sort of realize that like, oh, the person that I thought that I was is not that. The person that I thought that I loved is maybe different than I thought. Like it maybe looks different for me. And it's a millennial question that I think a lot of people are having constantly, certainly where I am. And so it makes sense both retrospectively, but even in the moment, like it all came from a very organic place of like, what does this character want to say? What is the important story here for him?
It's something that this isn't so much a question. It's just something that I really loved about that story and that element of the ongoing Tim Drake thing is like, people talk about the illusion of change with comics and how like, you know, they're characters that continue forever and things can happen to them, but there are general status quos to shake back down to. But something I really loved about this with Tim Drake is that like the way that the idea is introduced is like as a realization for him. Like it's just sort of like like I think this is an element of me, and I that felt really special to me because it doesn't feel like a retcon necessarily. It doesn't feel like some hard thing introduced to like it's like this is the new status quo. Like it just feels like this nice like easy like this is like me, and that I feel like that is a really special thing with a character that goes forever, because when that's something that you reflect upon with your own life, it's just sort of like, oh yeah, life just keeps going and going and going, and like you can very late in life have these realizations about yourself, and you can just like, and then like looking back you can like have that as context of things that have happened before. And I don't know, it's, like I said, it's not a question, it's just something that I think that seeing things like that happening in comics right now is really special, because it allows for the medium to have a lot of resonance for your real life. And I don't know, I just thought it was I thought it was really lovely.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Well, it's a big story of discovery insofar as what you're talking about, Ethan, and also he's a detective. He's discovering stuff all the time. So I love the sort of meta almost level of that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, also him and Bernard are so cute. I think
I
say.
I got some art pack recently for an issue that's coming out that I am so excited. I lost my mind over because I was like, this is adorable.
Especially like, you know, I'm sure we all are. Ethan and I are really big Spider-Man fans, and so much, of course, of his whole shtick is always the soap opera of it all, the relationship drama of it all. And so I love when there's some of that in my superhero comics.
Oh yeah.
And seeing it here, it has like a different tone to it, because it feels really wholesome, like from the jump. And then when it's amongst the super colorful cast of characters at the arena as well, it just feels so good. I also wanted to say that I love the whole like he's getting out from under Batman's shadow, and he's going out, he's doing his own thing. He's like, fuck you, Dad, I'm gonna go do my own thing. And then they're like, what are you gonna do? And he's like, I'm gonna do what my dad does, but
doing
better.
The same thing.
Yeah.
And that's so good, that's so real. And I really, really love everything that you guys are doing, talking about art. How good?
Yeah, I do pity you, because it's gotta be hard working with Riley Rossmo.
Yeah,
he's an absolute nightmare. He sends things in, and I'm like, how? But how he when I tell you, when I was like, okay, Marina, imagine if you will, the art that came back, I fell down. I fully could no longer stand, because I just was like, I want this on walls, not in the podcasting boat, because there's just no real wall space. But I need it somewhere in life. I will tapestry it to my body. Like I don't even. It was everything that I wanted.
Riley's an interesting guy. I never know what I want him on.
Yeah.
Because like Martian Manhunter was like, oh my god, that's but then like Harley was so chaotic and so like Riley cut loose, and then shifting from that to this, it was like, I didn't know I wanted this, but it's great. It's like It's
what he's doing with some of the like design elements. Wasn't like, I absolutely agree with what you just said, Ethan, where Harley was such a sort of so bombastic.
Yeah.
And then this has elements of that, but also is pushing him to do these things with like all the forensic stuff and the detective work that is so interesting. And I really, really love seeing it. And I love that, like, between those two titles in particular, like, there's this whole little weird corner of Gotham that is being like fleshed out by Riley, and I feel like this is just another really fantastic addition to that. Really, really good.
He's amazing, and he really is. He turns in art, and it is. I love the journey that he always takes me on, because it's always a thing of like, oh, I didn't know that is what I needed this art to look like. I didn't know that that's what I wanted this to be. And he's so creative, and he's so like I could wax poetic on for him for hours and hours, because he's also the nicest. Of course he is. He's Canadian, like of course.
Yeah. Well, speaking of nice, he had to ship me something for us to ship out to a fan. Yeah, and he knew he knew I was reading Robin, that I was digging Robin, and so he included this with the thing that I had to ship out. And so
that's so good. God damn, that's awesome.
Yes.
And I was like, do you want me to like include this for the person who won your piece? And he's like, no, that's for you. And I was like, you son of a bitch. God damn.
He's the best guy.
Nice.
He's so good.
So nice. It's not fair.
I like that was just in a pile somewhere in your house also.
Well,
it was on top of his clothes over there.
It's with a bunch of things that have to be put up on the wall.
I wanted to ask you quickly about your animation work, because that's been super interesting too, is that you're on the DC animation side. You were just talking in your newsletter about so I've never heard it said out loud. Is it Ruby?
It's Ruby, yes. You're right.
League
It's
Ruby
Justice
movie.
League Ruby.
I mean, I'm very aware of Ruby. I've just never heard anyone say. So I'm like, is it RWBY or is it Ruby?
I know.
Is it like
I
the
ran
YMCA?
into the same thing. You're fine.
Yeah.
I know.
YMCA is Yimka. You're supposed to say Yimka.
Oh my god, that's
you
crazy.
said it wrong there.
This whole time.
That's the song is really misleading then. But so that was super interesting, because you were talking about how long animation takes to get out and how you wrote that like in 2021. And that's super cool to me, and that's all really exciting. Is that a space that you really enjoy working in, and are you you might not be able to say, but are you wanting to do more there, like and is that similar to the TV process at all?
Great questions. I love animation. One of my favorite shows growing up was the Justice League animated show. Like it just was incredibly formative and influential into my young life. And it is something why, like, I find it really important. I find animation really important. Once again, I think that like leaning into spaces where you can actually change minds rather than like try and change minds when they're later in life. It seems. Yeah, right. Yeah. Why aren't we teaching people to be so kind and nice when they're younger? Right. Would argue, but so I very much love animation for that. The process is long. I love to do more of it. I am doing a little more of it, and
nice.
I'll honestly say it's actually more similar to writing audio.
All right. Yeah.
Yeah, it's writing animation, because you have to write. The way that I always think about it, whenever you're writing in different mediums, I always think about it as, who am I writing this for? Not the audience. The audience is like second or third person down the line of who I think about. In comics, I am writing for the artist and the editor. In animation, I'm writing for the storyboard artist and the director and the voiceover actors. In television, I'm writing for hundreds of different departments, and in audio, I'm writing for the sound designer and the voice actors. And so, with audio and animation, the sound designer is like the storyboard artists, and so when I am writing a script for either one, I have to be very visual in what I'm explaining and describing. Whereas in comics, you sort of create, like, it's one person that I'm writing to generally. Like I'm writing to the in terms of an artist. I'm writing to a specific artist, so like we'll have shorthands, or we'll be on the phone and it'll be like, it's like that thing that I told you about that like looks like this. I had a thing recently where I was like, that moment when like in The Great Mouse Detective where Olivia pulls the blanket back and it's a bat and it's terrifying. I want that.
So
That's what I want. That's a harder thing to write in like an audio or animation script. So that I think I tend to think of it as animation is more like writing for audio and vice versa. Whereas comics, because it's still, that's the other thing, right? It's static images. Whereas you're still sort of able to roll through the images for animation. So yeah.
Right. We got to hear about that Substack. You're doing cool stuff over there.
Thank you. I just started it. I took a lesson from some of my favorite Substack people.
And you hired us.
Maybe or maybe not on this call. They are. I have been really fascinated I've been reading Substacks for a little while now, and it's especially as social media, who knows what Twitter is, who knows where any of that is. But Substack, what I've been wanting to do with it is sort of just create a space for people to talk about writing in different mediums and formats. I'm really passionate about it. I get very annoyed when in the year of our Lord 2023, people are told to stay in one lane and only write one particular type of media. That is impossible. That does not pay the bills anymore. Even in television, which it should pay a lot of money, that is no longer the case in some situations. And so I am very much a big proponent of writing in different mediums because it also makes you a better writer. It makes you a better storyteller. And so I was looking up, trying to find spaces where people talk about the differences between different mediums and what you can take from different places. And there's just not a lot because the advice is always focus on one. And so I'm trying to create a community within that says, you can focus on a lot of things as long as you focus on one particular thing. What is it that you're trying to say? For me, I want to tell people that they are loved. That is my goal through stories, whatever type of medium that I am using. That is how I will be the person that I am for this. Like I will be able to tell people that they are loved. That is who I am, and I can do that in any media format. And I think it's really important. I think it's really cool too that like there are all these different types of ways to tell a story, and we can only learn and we can only grow. So yeah, come find me over at Substack. It's Meghan Fitzmartin, I believe, is the URL.
Love it. That's awesome.
We'll put a link up or something. We know how to do that, right, guys?
We'll figure it out.
I believe.
Yeah.
I'll Google it real quick. There's probably an FAQ.
Well, Megan, thank you so much for coming on the show and hanging out.
Thanks so much for having me.
I feel like this show, like a lot of times it's people we have on who are comics writers, who are friends of mine and people I know. And I always get excited when a writer can come on who does something that I really love that I can't do. And you tell these stories that are so hopeful and optimistic and fun in a way that like I'm very envious of and jealous of. and I love it, and I'm so excited, and it's always exciting for me as a comics creator to see someone else in comics who's doing that and telling these stories that are getting people excited and happy. And you see with the Tim Drake stuff and the books you're making, like people who aren't normally in a comic shop getting excited about a book and talking about a comic. And that's so exciting for me, and I think should be for all comics fans. And
absolutely. Well, and I try and push people your way, your work on. No, it's true. 4 Kids Walk Into a Bank. And I was so excited when What's the Furthest Place from Here started coming out, because I have loved both of those so much. And
thank you. Megan, this was awesome and super fun, and thank you for making the awesome books that you do, and thank you for coming and hanging out with us for a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me.
And that brings us to the end of part 2 of our discussion with Meghan Fitzmartin. Make sure to check out Tim Drake Robin, as well as everything else Meghan is working on by giving her a follow on Twitter at MegFitz89. To get the latest episodes of this podcast, as well as news, giveaways, and even comics delivered straight to your inbox, go to ashcanpress.com and sign up for the newsletter. We'll be back next week with another wonderful guest, and in the meantime, you can write to us at ideasdon'tbleedpod@gmail.com or tweet to Matthew Rosenberg at ashcanpress on Twitter, me at Tales to Astonish, or Griffin at Griff Sheridan. We'll include some of your correspondence on the show, and we'd love to hear what you have to say. And big thanks to Summer People for our theme song, Where's the Poison? Thanks so much for listening, and we'll see you next time.